Welcome to the Executive Outlook. Today, we are joined by Ben Banks, President and CEO of BNSF Logistics. Ben has spent nearly 2 decades leading at the intersection of logistics, rail, engineering, and large scale transportation, guiding complex operations to stronger performance, safer executions, and sustainable growth. Welcome, Ben, to the Executive Outlook.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So, Ben, you have built your career in intersection of logistic, engineering, and large-scale transportation system. How did you start your journey, and what led you to become the CEO at the BNSF Logistics?
Well, once again, thank you very much for having me. It's an honor to be here. It has been an exciting career. It has been almost 2 decades. And when I think of it that way, it feels like a long time, but it doesn't feel like it's been a long time. So I'm still learning and every day, and I'm faced with new challenges, things I've never faced before, and we'll get to that maybe a little bit later. As far as how I got started, I was hired by BNSF Railway back in 2007 as a train master. And what a train master is, similar to an air traffic controller in the aviation segment, I wasn't operating the trains in the transportation business. I was managing those who do. And through the gathering and distribution of our customers' rail cars, making sure that they're headed the right direction, and also the final delivery to those customers, making sure that it's done safely and efficiently. I did that for about 5 years, and that role, maybe more than any other role that I ever had, was pivotal to my success, especially in the transportation segment. What it allowed me to do was to understand how customers interact with trains. It helped me to understand what works well, what doesn't work well, and also just have an intimate knowledge of what railroading is. And so when I went on, after about 5 years, went on to sales and marketing at BNSF Railway, that intimate knowledge enabled me to be able to help our customers in a unique way. Not a lot of my peers had the same experience that I had. So when it came to helping customers build out a carload program, to troubleshoot the carload program, to advocate on their behalf, they really didn't have very many sales folks that knew how to do it as well as I did it. And they started to advocate on my behalf. And that's actually what put me on the trajectory I ended up on, are the customers advocating on my behalf to my leadership, saying, hey, the way that Ben Banks does this, we really, really like it. And we don't have very many other sales managers across the industry or account managers that are able to do what he's able to do. So that helped my organization kind of see Ben Banks in a different way. And I'll forever be grateful to that. Ultimately, most recently, as I moved up through the sales and marketing organization, I led the organization that handles and manages what we call the big and ugly and weird. Everything that's really, really large that moves on the BNSF network, that came through my team. And one of my customers was a company called BNSF Logistics. BNSF Logistics is the sister company of BNSF Railway. It was established in 2002. And we'll get into maybe a little bit more about that relationship later on. But the reality is that for a long time, BNSF Railway and BNSF Logistics had operated in two different silos. And there was a vision of the BNSF Logistics board to bring the two companies, BNSF Railway and BNSF Logistics, closer together. They made that decision. They began to look for someone who might be able to do that. And I was uniquely qualified to do that. So it was the right timing. And they selected me as president and CEO of the company back in 2024. So I've been here a little over 18 months now.
Thank you so much for sharing that journey. So, in your career, what has been the biggest challenges that you have faced, and how did you overcome those challenges?
Every position that I've been at BNSF Railway presented, and then now at BNSF Logistics, presented very unique challenges. But I will say that the biggest challenge I ever faced is actually that first role. Coming in off the street to serve as a train master, a first line supervisor of very tenured, very experienced, very qualified railroaders. They knew far more than I did. So that presents, as a leader, that presents its own challenges too. How are you going to lead people well when they know far more than you do about the company that you're now serving, about the day-to-day tasks that they're performing? So that was a challenge in and of itself. How do you lead those people well? But also the role itself. It was nights, weekends. I remember I worked 72 hours straight, worked 22 days in a row. I'd never done anything like that before. And I think it'd be fair to say that the retention rate is the lowest for first line supervisors in the industry when it comes to class one railroads. Being a train master is a tough job, and it stretched me the most for sure. but definitely taught me a lot. I think the strategies that I employed, how did I overcome that? The reality is a lot of people were praying for me, and I stood a lot of praying. So there's that. But also I have a mentality that I've carried with me. I brought to the railroad, shaped a little bit by the railroad, my experiences there, but have continued to serve me well ever since. And first and foremost is I'm going to do whatever it takes to get the job done well. That's just my mentality. That's the work ethic that I have. That's the resilience and grit that I brought to the railroad. And that served me really, really well, because even if it was 21, 22 days in a row, 12-hour shifts, even if it was 72 hours straight where I'm sleeping when I can in a cot in one of our offices, I'm going to do what it takes. Now, I will say that I had more energy 20 years ago than what I have right now. So I'm not sure that I could put in the effort like I used to from that perspective, just the physical grit that it took to do it. But that was a really tough job. But first and foremost, my mentality that I'm going to get it done no matter what. I'm not going to be outworked by my peers. I'm going to work just as hard or harder than they do to get it done. And I'm going to work as smart as I can, of course. But when you're new to a role, it's hard to work smart because you're just working hard. The second thing that was really important, especially when I talk about leading people that know far more than I do, I am the first to say, I don't have all the answers. When I first started, than it used to be, leading through transparency, leading with humility, and just, humility, what I mean by that really is just having a right understanding of yourself and right understanding of what your capabilities are. The reality for me was at the time, I had very low capabilities. So I'm coming in here to serve these individuals. And that's part of the mentality too of, coming at it from a perspective of humility. But I asked a lot of questions. I asked my employees, what's working, what's not working? How should this work? What would be the ideas that you have? And then I employed them. And through that, even though I didn't have competence in the role itself as far as skill sets and understanding and wisdom of how to lead specifically as a railroader, I earned trust through that type of competence. The competence being that I brought people around me who knew more than I did, and I listened to them. And I think that maybe more than anything else, that really set me apart with my teams and with the people above me too, my leaders, where I was constantly leaning on their wisdom. I was listening. And frankly, when you listen to the wisdom of others, it just makes your life a little bit easier too. I understood that was needed, and that's a mentality I've always had. The other part of my mentality that's always served me well is I know how to treat people well. That wasn't something that I learned at the railroad. That was something I brought to the railroad. And that was super important, that right out of the gate, I knew how to make people do more than what they thought was possible, to believe in themselves more, to understand their intrinsic value as a human being. That was something I brought to the railroad. I didn't have to learn that. And why that's important is because you're going to be surrounded by people, even a great company like BNSF Railway, you're going to be surrounded by people sometimes that don't know how to treat people well. I got advice from some people that they didn't know how to treat people well. And they didn't know how to inspire. They didn't know how to really lead. So I knew that advice is bad advice, and I'm not going to apply it. And that kept me out of a few ditches for sure. And at times it made me, I'd have some conflicts with maybe some peers or even one of my leaders. But the reality is that over time, I was proven right. And I was proven successful. The last thing I would say is that I've always been a very curious person, and I ask a lot of questions about things that on the surface have nothing to do with my role, that have nothing to do with anything that's going to affect me today. But I'm just curious. What do you do for a living? What's your story? Have you ever seen this before? What did you do last time you saw that? What do you think about this political event? I just ask a lot of questions. I'm super curious. I didn't know that about myself until later on in my career, and I realized, and I got some feedback, you're a naturally curious person. What that has helped me to do is connect dots. Either maybe it wasn't a question that I got answered. Maybe it didn't impact my day-to-day at the time, but maybe 5 years down the road, I remembered that conversation, and I was able to connect a dot for what I was doing currently. And connecting dots and listening well has served me very, very well. So how did I overcome that big role as train master? All those things. And it's funny, every position, then what BNSF Railway does really, really well is you don't make huge jumps in your career. There are incremental increases in responsibility that they give you over time, so you never feel terribly overwhelmed. It was really that very first role that was very overwhelming. But because of that mentality, it proved successful, and it has proved successful in my current role too. Just applying all of that, coming into a company that I'd never worked at before, coming into a company that was a good company already, just coming in with that, I don't have all the answers. I'm going to do whatever it takes. You're going to see me here working long hours. You're going to see me being a servant leader, and I'm going to ask a lot of questions, and I'm going to help us connect dots. I'm going to build trust through that competence. And I think so far it's gone pretty well.
Amazing. That's such a positive attitude towards learning, towards one discussion, and that relates with many people. I have a question here. What do you think as a CEO? What is your responsibility, and what are the different roles that you're right now handling within the organization?
My role as a CEO, and I think this would be true at any company, there are a few, and to be frank about it, I read a lot. And this is the first CEO role I've ever had. So I have other friends who are CEOs. My brother's a CEO of a company. I'm friends with Katie Farmer, who's the CEO of BNSF Railway. And I've definitely, once again, asked for a lot of advice, but I read a lot of books too. And two books in particular that have been very helpful for me. One's called CEO Test. The other one's called CEO Excellence by the McKinsey Group. And that one in particular has been very helpful. And I love to summarize it. So forgive me. I'm going to look over at my board. I actually keep it on a whiteboard next to me. But my priorities are to set the direction, align the organization, mobilize through my leaders, manage my personal effectiveness, engage the board, and connect with stakeholders. And I have found that to be incredibly helpful for me to think about on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, even how I'm balancing my calendar. Am I setting the direction? Am I aligning the organization? Am I mobilizing through my leaders, et cetera? But I do think that and that's what the McKinsey Group would say too, that any good CEO, that's what they're spending the majority of their time doing. And I try to spend the majority of my time doing that. Specifically, the roles that I have here, a good C-suite, a diverse C-suite. I've got a chief operating officer. I've got a chief marketing officer, a chief engineering officer. We are an engineering firm. We're a P&P project management firm too. And then I've got a chief financial officer. And then I've got a senior counsel as well. My role is, once again, to align them, to set the direction, but we call it our round table. I don't sit here, as I've talked about before, I don't sit here and go, this is where we're headed without asking what anybody else thinks. And the good news is that most of my organization has been in this company for a long time, so they have great wisdom to share, or they come from another organization where they have a lot to offer. So we call it our round table, and we discuss all of our big decisions, whether if it's a marketing approach, it's still going to be discussed by the chief operating officer, the chief financial officer. We all get to discuss the big discussions, and the ownership is with the business unit leader, but we all get to discuss the big decisions. It doesn't take us very long. It may sound like a slow process, but actually works very well for us. So I'm I'm aligning that organization, and if it has to come down to it, where if we've got some indecision, I'll make it. I engage my board. I'm responsible primarily for our relationship with the board and making sure that the board is aligned with where we're headed and what we're doing. And then also I kind of serve as a general counsel. I'm not a lawyer, so I have to rely heavily on our lawyers. But the reality is that I work with I oversee our counsel as well and make sure that we are protected in everything that we do. But for the most part, what I'm spending most of my time doing is I'm the face of the company. So I do things like this, but also just making sure that we know what our vision and purpose is, that we're committed to it, and we're constantly headed that way.
I have a follow-up question on this. That if suppose you are starting a new initiative within the organization, so how you will approach that initiative that it goes from top to bottom levels of all the roles?
That's a very good question. We are doing that right now. When I first came to the company, one of the primary objectives that I had was to get us back to our core. You'll hear a lot of CEOs talking about that right now, getting back to their core. What was their purpose? What are they really good at? And then you may decide to grow your capabilities, but getting back to your core is a theme you'll hear from a lot of CEOs right now, and we're the same. So I'd say for the first 6 months, we were trying to establish what is our purpose, what is our vision. Let's get back to our core. Why that's important to this question here is that we're not going to launch any initiatives, and that's the philosophy of my board. It's my philosophy as well. But we're not going to launch anything that is largely outside of our wheelhouse, what our core is. We don't want to be distracted by activities or pursuits that we know that we're going to be one of many maybe that are already doing it, or that we know that we're going to have to learn a lot about in order for us to enter into it. There's plenty of capabilities that we currently have that maybe if we just modify a little bit, we could broaden our reach tremendously. And that's how we're approaching it. We have a couple of initiatives that we've already begun that will accelerate in 2026. But that was first and foremost. Is we know what our core is. We also have a very clear vision and purpose statement that guides, that's what we call our navigational heading. We use this boat analogy a lot, so you'll hear me talk about that if you ask more questions about this. But we have our navigational heading. We know that our vision is to be the premier logistics provider in our space. We know that our purpose Why we exist as a company is to provide empowering solutions to our customers, to provide operational excellence to our customers, and to provide strategic advantage to our customers in their markets. That's why we exist. So first and foremost, any new capability or new initiative that we have has to fall within our core of what we're good at, or at least that we could scale, easily. We also think about it as far as what is the impact to revenue and also the difficulty of implementation. And we try to graph that out actually a little bit. And we want to make sure that anything that we're working on that may be new is in that top left quadrant. And the reason I'm spending so much time on this, I think this is important for anybody walking into maybe a new CEO role, is to be disciplined in your approach to that. The smaller companies that want to be entrepreneurial and they maybe want to chase a lot of different cars. They may want to jump in, go down a lot of different rabbit holes. I would encourage you to be disciplined in your approach with that. Recognize what your company's already good at, and then apply that discipline. And you're gonna disappoint some people. Some people are like, I think we ought to be doing that. That company over there is doing this. Let's go after that. What is your purpose? What is your vision? What's your core? And does it fit? And how would you define that? So for us, we've got a couple of initiatives. One, we know they fit for us. And once again, what's my number one responsibility? Setting the direction of the company. And then number two, aligning the organization. So once I know it fits, then I'm going to talk to the board about it. I'm going to make sure that they're constantly aligned, make sure the C-suite's constantly aligned. And then through them, I'm going to mobilize through my leaders to make sure that their people are aligned. The good news is, one of your questions was, how do you make sure that everybody's kind of headed the right direction? The reality is that because of my approach and my mentality, and thankfully my C-suite's mentality is the same, that we don't have all the answers. We are leaning heavily on multiple levels in our organization to create new capabilities, to create new market approaches, to create anything new. Isn't going to be coming from bin banks. It's going to be a collective effort where a lot of people have said, yeah, we can do that. We can do that well. And because once again, what's our vision? To be the premier logistics provider in our space. It doesn't mean that we're not, right out of the gate, that we might have some bumps and some evolution and things that we need to learn as we roll out a product. But definitely it has to be something that we are confident that we can achieve premier status in a hurry, because we don't want to do any damage to our reputation. Well, I don't know that just by myself, and my team doesn't necessarily know that. So we're reaching out down to our directors saying, hey, we're thinking about this. Or they're reaching up to us saying, hey, we've noticed this. This is a niche that maybe we could play in. And we have that discussion. Does it fit? Okay, if it does fit, well, then what does that service product actually need to look like? It's a team effort. Now, this works, I think, at any size organization, but we're probably a medium-sized company. It works really, really well for us because it doesn't take very long to talk to a lot of people and get a lot of different perspectives. But that's how we make sure it's aligned. One, we get a lot of buy-in because a lot of people had an opportunity to weigh in to what the approach to market is going to be, exactly how we're going to execute it operationally, what the back office looks like to support it. We make sure that they've had a lot of input. And then after that, we make sure that we have customer input too. We rely heavily, right or wrong. I mean, it's something I'm reading another book right now called The Lean Startup by Eric Ries. I'm about 100 pages in, so I'm not sure, but I'm going to learn from that book. Maybe sometimes we shouldn't rely as heavily on customer opinion as we do, but we just want to make sure there's a market out there for what we're talking about. And we'd like them to at least inform us as to how we should shape that particular service product. And we'd love to have some first adopters too. So that's that constant customer engagement one as well. But then after that, it becomes very, our chief operating officer, he's a Kaizen lead, he's a Six Sigma black belt, and he's going to push that we have Gantt charts, that we know exactly what our thresholds are and what the flow is going to be. And we draft all that out through a system that we use called Reich. That's what he does really, really well, how he mobilizes through his team to make sure that we're headed the right direction, and we have tangible thresholds that we know that we're meeting to keep us on track. One thing that I would say that we probably could do better as part of that Gantt chart is to make sure, and this is what I'm learning from Eric Ries, is to make sure that we have learnings, intentional learnings along the way. How do we know that we're still on the right track? How do we know that something's been successful or not been successful, and what do we learn from that? I think we probably do better there, but that's more probably my problem, my chief operating officer's problem. So I think he feels the same way. We just not employed it yet. Does that answer your question, Isha, at all?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing the insights. So, can you share a simple case study where your team solved a big problem and what result it created for the customer or the businesses?
That's a great question, of course. You actually sent me that question just for your audience. You sent me that question ahead of time so I could think about it. I could not think of a simple one. So forgive me for that, because I'm in such a niche industry. It's hard to think of a simple one, but I'll move through it as quickly as I can. And you should just tell me if it's not making any sense. About 10 years ago, I led frac sand kind of business unit. What it was more of a sub forecast group at the time. But for those of you who don't know, frac sand is used for fracking. And, you have these shales where you have oil trapped between rock. You pump this sand and water down, and it opens up cracks where it lets the oil come out, or they use it for natural gas, I believe, too. But anyway, you're actually fracturing the rock to let the oil out. And about 10 years ago, oil had been consistently trading well above $75. And the reality is in the U.S., there was just this shale boom. There was a lot of fracking going on in the U.S., and the Class 1 railroads were called upon to help move everything related to getting everything from upstream down to the refineries. And what we saw out of nowhere in a portfolio that wasn't real exciting at the time, all of a sudden we saw these covered hoppers, these rail cars showing up on our network, and just single car shipments. And there were a bunch of them and kind of clogging up our network a bit. Well, the operating team for BNSF Railway came to me and said, hey, we need a solution here. These customers want to do probably a lot more of this volume, and we can't really handle it efficiently. We had one customer at the time who had tried what's called a unit train concept, where you load 100 plus cars at one time at a single origin, and then just BNSF Railway puts locomotives on that one, you call that a train, and just put locomotives on it and ship it to final destination. And it just bypasses the entire network, goes direct to destination. It's kind of like an interstate, as opposed to going through a bunch of little towns. And to use that analogy, a highway network. So we'd had one customer try it. They weren't real crazy about it. If I remember right, this going back a ways, but they weren't real crazy about it. But I definitely saw the benefit of it for them, and obviously for BNSF Railway too, that you could, instead of having one car being shipped every other day, you could have 100 cars ship at one time. That's a lot more efficient for our network. And ultimately, it's better visibility for our customers because it's their train. They have a train that is theirs. It's dedicated to them. And it bypasses most of our network and goes straight to destination. The customers at the time, it's a small industry, and they'd all been talking, and they're like, unit train, that requires a lot of infrastructure or a headache at the origin, because you got to load 100 cars at one time instead of one. And then when it gets to destination, it's just overloading your market with a ton of sand all at once. So you probably need silos at destination. And anyway, a lot of complaints. There weren't a lot of people crazy about unit train at the time. Anyway, I knew that I just had that gut feeling this is probably what's right for the industry, it's right for my customers, and it's going to be what's best for BNSF Railway too. And I'm constantly looking for that win-win-win. So I worked with my team to try to create a pitch that would maybe make sense to them. And as we were working through it, we talked about being a very reliable service product. You also have a very eager service provider, BNSF Railway, who wants to see this go well. Whenever you have an eager service provider, what that means, that translates into dollars. That means that they may be willing to incent it to help offset the infrastructure that's required to support it. You've got wide open spaces in Texas and North Dakota and the Niobrara in Colorado and in parts of Oklahoma too, where you could build unit train facilities and you could build big silos to be able to handle this. But the most important piece of this is that inventory is king. And what I'd noticed is that our customers who had sand in the market when it was needed by the pressure pumpers, like the Halliburton, Schlumbergers of the world, as long as there was sand there, no matter how much it costs, they buy it. Because if one producer has sand there and the other one doesn't, they'll pay whatever they need to for it. So inventory is king, which is true across so many industries, right? So that's what we sold. Now, initially, the procurement organizations of these frac sand producers were not terribly excited about what we were asking them to do, because building a unit train is complicated. It's hard, and it asks a lot of their teams. And maybe some of them didn't have any experience in it. So ultimately, with one of the shippers, I took an opportunity to get in front of their CEO, maybe without asking permission. And I just pitched the idea to her directly. And she actually got somewhat interested in it and told me to talk to her sales team. And that's what made all the difference. The sales team understood inventory as king more than even the procurement team, or at least they were more excited about it. So when I got in front of their sales team pushed the rest of the organization, hey, we need this option because it's going to be the fastest way that we can get to market, and we get a lot of sand to market, and we can charge more for it. So that was our first adopter. Our first real adopter was after that. And they won really fast, a lot of market share, which then brought everybody else that I've been trying to sell this idea to along. Like, well, we got to now because you got a first adopter here and they're winning market share. Now we got to compete with more unit trains. And it actually changed the entire industry. So up until that point, frac sand had been moved exclusively in single car shipments. After we started the unit train model, the Union Pacific adopted it, the NS adopted it. Everybody had to adopt this unit train model because it was so efficient. And those who had adopted it had won. It was a huge market share win for BNSF Railway. We went from 30% market share to 70% in 2 years. And then for our shippers too, those who had the unit train model were winning, those who didn't. And even after I left that business unit, that was still the story for a long time for them. That was a huge win for us. A lot of listening, a lot of connecting dots, a lot of teamwork to try to build. I mean, I can't go to my organization and say, hey, we need to help them build unit train infrastructure. I had to cast that vision and lean on other people to help shape that vision where it made sense to everybody in our organization too, where it'd be a win-win for the customers. But that, when he sent that, I was like, that's probably one of the biggest and most challenging case studies that I could provide, although not simple. So forgive me for it taking so long. Hopefully everybody understood what I was talking about.
I followed it along, so it is such an interesting one, and its outcome is amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I have another question. Not all project has a success, right? Some big projects also fail. So
Yes.
how do you identify the reasons behind the failure and what you learn from those failure projects? So can you share some stories around that?
Well, maybe no specific stories, but I'll definitely share with you what I see as the primary drivers over and over and over again. Number one, timing. That's the most humble and most honest answer I could provide. Even think about the example I just gave. I don't doubt that my predecessors had pitched unit train before Isha, but the timing was wrong. And when the timing is right and the customer needs it and you have a service product that's ready to be provided, and maybe the external markets that are driving our customers' markets are looking for a solution that you happen to have, timing's right, it works really, really well. If the timing's wrong, even if it's a great idea, it won't matter if the timing's wrong. So that's number one. I'd say timing. Number two, I would say listening. Listening is a huge part. And I think of listening, I always associate the word observation with listening too. You're observing too when you're listening. And you're listening to your customers, you're listening to your internal company, you're listening to what's going on in the larger markets that may be affecting what's impacting your customers. But if you're not listening, you're not observing well, you're not going to recognize the timing, whether or not it's a good time or a bad time, whether or not the solution that you're providing is going to make sense or it's not going to make sense. That listening and observing and connecting those dots appropriately and analyzing those data points coming at you and being able to tell a trend story, as I call them. If you can't tell the trend story, you're probably not going to come to the right conclusion. So that comes back to listening and observing in a big way. I would say just being resilient is another reason why projects don't always work out. Maybe the timing was wrong when you presented it, but it's a good product. So either the company maybe walks away from the service product too quickly, or instead of just shelving it and coming back to it when they believe the timing is right, they just walk away from it completely. Or you just get exhausted of pitching the idea and maybe you just haven't found that first adopter yet. There's a lot of resilience and grit that makes one successful and that's required no matter what you're doing. And if you're not there for when the timing is right, you're obviously not going to win. But if you're there when the timing is right, it probably means you've been pitching it for some time and you've been evolving the product to some degree. The goal is to be there when the timing is right. If you don't have the resilience and the grit, or you're not listening to the data points that tell you the timing is right, you're going to miss. Or the project's going to fail because you rolled it out too early or you rolled it out too late.
Got it. Got your perspective. And it happens, actually. You're right. So it happens to us as well. So when there is not a good timing, there's not a need. And when we are pitching, then okay, we'll see to it, we'll look at it later, right? But then when they face the problem, when anyone faces the problem, so they come back, okay, now is the time. So that is so important.
I was thinking too, as you were talking there, I get stuff sold to me on LinkedIn all the time. People are approaching me to buy something all the time. And I may say no thank you on LinkedIn, or somebody calls me and I'm like, no thank you. But even in the back of my mind, a lot of times I'm thinking someday I may wish I'd said yes to that. It's just the timing's not right yet. And so I'd encourage all of your listeners to, even if you get a no thank you initially, try to understand why, if it's a timing issue or if it's something just the customer may not recognize that they need quite yet. But once again, it comes back to that resilience. Just continue to be there. Don't be pestering. Don't be annoying, but try to understand when would be a good time. And don't just ask that question. So I get that sometimes. When would be a good time to call you back? I don't know, because I don't see the need yet. So a better question would be, Ben, what would have to change in your market or in your company for you to see a need? And then you can be watching, you can be observing for when that might come as you're following that company and maybe public announcements or whatever the case may be, or just the industry in general, and then follow up at that point when you think the timing's right based on the customer's feedback. But yeah, I think that's important. Timing is, as they say, everything.
All right, I think Ben, this is what I wanted to ask you today. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and the practical lessons on leadership and how you have executed it within the organization. It's a pleasure having you on the Executive Outlook.